The first confirmed alien signal didn't arrive as music or mathematics. It arrived as a weapon discharge. On March 4, 2187, the Deep Space Monitoring Array designated Helio 9, positioned at the gravitational midpoint between Jupiter and the asteroid belt, registered an electromagnetic pulse of non-solar origin. The pulse lasted 0.003 seconds. It left behind a 16-kilometer scar across the hull of the UN cargo hauler Meridian Cross, and killed all 41 crew members aboard before they could transmit a single distress call. Humanity had been searching for extraterrestrial intelligence for over 2 centuries. They found it the hard way. Sergeant Major Darius Vale had been in transit when the incident report crossed his secure feed. He was aboard the Ariadne, a mid-class patrol cruiser running supply lines along the outer solar perimeter, not exactly glamorous work for someone with his record. 3 deployments on the Martian border conflict. Decorated twice for coordinated rescue under fire. A man who, by most assessments, should have been sitting behind a desk in New Geneva rather than running cargo manifests past the frost line. But Vale preferred the cold. He preferred the quiet. And more than anything, he preferred being close to the thing most people tried to stay away from. The edge. He read the incident report 3 times. Not because the words were unclear, they were blunt and clinical in the way military language always was when it was hiding something terrible, but because he was making sure he understood what the words weren't saying. The pulse had originated from a vector that placed its source approximately 340 million kilometers from Earth, moving inward at a rate inconsistent with any known natural phenomenon. Something was coming. The United Earth Navy's initial response was cautious. That was the word the press briefings used. Cautious. Which, in military translation, meant, we have no idea what we're dealing with and we're buying time. 3 deep reconnaissance drones were dispatched within 72 hours. 2 returned. The third sent back 11 seconds of visual data before its transmission cut out. Vale watched those 11 seconds 40 times over the next 2 days. The vessel, if it could be called that, was not a ship in any architectural sense humanity would recognize. It was a structure, enormous, asymmetrical, built with the kind of confidence that doesn't need to be aerodynamic or symmetrical because physics simply isn't an obstacle anymore. It moved through space the way a cathedral might move, slowly, deliberately, with absolute certainty that the ground would hold. Estimated dimensions, 4.2 kilometers in length, 1.8 kilometers at its widest point. For context, humanity's largest active warship, the UN Sovereign, stretched 890 meters from bow to stern and had taken 11 years to build. This thing could swallow the Sovereign twice over and still have room. The Sovereign herself was scrambled 6 days after the Meridian Cross incident. She was the flagship of the United Earth Navy's first deep response fleet, a coalition of 14 warships assembled for exactly this kind of contingency, though nobody in the fleet had ever genuinely believed the contingency would become real. Training exercises and theoretical scenarios have a certain comfortable unreality to them. The moment the Sovereign's captain, Admiral Commander Iris Talon, received her orders in person rather than through standard comms protocols, that unreality collapsed. Iris Talon was 53 years old. Born in the coastal city of Izmir, she had joined the UN at 19, risen through the officer corps on a combination of strategic brilliance and a near-pathological refusal to lose people unnecessarily. Her service record included the suppression of the Europa Station mutiny, the Ganymede humanitarian extraction, and 3 first-contact readiness exercises that she had each time graded as inadequate. She had written the assessment report that resulted in the construction of the Sovereign. She had, in a sense, built the ship she now commanded. Standing on the bridge as it broke from orbital dock, she did not look triumphant. She looked like a woman calculating how much of what she'd prepared was actually going to be enough. Her answer, she suspected, was, not all of it. Darius Vale was reassigned to the Sovereign on day 8. The reassignment came with no explanation beyond a single-line note from the Office of Strategic Coordination. Your specific skill profile has been flagged for Tier 1 contact preparation. He'd spent 6 hours trying to figure out exactly which skill on his profile had triggered a flag. His language aptitude scores were above average but not exceptional. His tactical record was strong but not unique. He was a good soldier, genuinely good, the kind that experienced officers trusted with difficult situations, but he wasn't the best the UN had, and he knew it. It wasn't until he boarded the Sovereign and was escorted not to standard crew quarters but to the diplomatic coordination deck, a section of the ship he hadn't even known existed, that he began to understand. The deck was staffed by linguists, xenobiologists, behavioral analysts, and 3 individuals whose titles were simply listed as protocol advisors. The room smelled of recycled air and quiet stress. On the main display, a live feed of the alien vessel played on a 6-hour loop. A woman turned from the display as he entered. She was not in military uniform. She wore the deep navy blue of the United Earth Diplomatic Corps, with a single silver thread along the collar that Vale recognized, slowly and then with a start, as the insignia of the Sovereign Council. The governing body of the entire United Earth Authority. Not an ambassador. Not a council representative. The chair. Councillor Sovereign Emira Solis. The closest thing humanity had to a head of state in a unified government. She was 47, dark-eyed, and looking at him with the specific expression of someone who has been awake for 3 days and has stopped apologizing for it. Sergeant Major Vale, she said. You were the first responder during the Ganymede evacuation. You coordinated 17 civilians through a pressurized collapse without losing a single person. Yes, ma'am. More importantly, she said, you did it while maintaining communication with individuals you had never met, in a situation where trust had to be established in under 4 minutes. He said nothing. He was beginning to understand why he was here. We don't know what that vessel wants, Solis said, turning back to the display. We don't know if it's a warship, a diplomatic envoy, a colony vessel, or something we don't have a category for. What we know is that it has not fired again since the Meridian Cross. And we know that it has been transmitting. Transmitting what? Vale asked. She looked at him. Patterns, she said. Regular, repeating, mathematically structured patterns. The linguists believe it's an attempt at communication. She paused. The strategists believe it's a countdown. Vale looked at the alien structure on the display. Slow. Enormous. Certain. What do you believe? He asked. Councillor Sovereign Emira Solis was quiet for a long moment. I believe, she said carefully, that in approximately 11 days, we're going to find out which one of them is right. And I believe that when that moment comes, I need people around me who are better at staying calm in impossible situations than they are at looking impressive on paper. She met his eyes. Welcome aboard, Sergeant Major. The patterns repeated every 4 hours and 17 minutes. Not approximately. Not roughly. Exactly, to a precision that the Sovereign's chronometric systems could measure but not fully explain, because achieving that level of temporal accuracy across interstellar distances required either technology humanity hadn't developed yet, or a fundamental understanding of spacetime that made such precision trivially easy. Neither option was particularly comforting. Dr. Priya Anand, the Sovereign's lead xenolinguist, had been awake for 51 hours by the time Vale found her in the signal analysis bay on Deck 7. She was small, fast-moving, the kind of person who seemed to vibrate slightly even when standing still. 3 empty coffee bulbs were magnetically attached to the edge of her workstation. A 4th was in her hand. You're the new protection detail, she said without looking up. I'm not, Vale started. You're assigned to the diplomatic coordination deck, you're not a linguist or an analyst, and the council chair specifically requested a field operator with crisis management experience. She finally looked up. Her eyes were sharp despite the exhaustion behind them. You're the new protection detail. It's fine. I'm not insulted. Vale pulled a chair from an adjacent station and sat. What are you looking at? She turned the display toward him. The pattern scrolled across the screen in a visual representation the analysis team had built, a cascading series of tonal frequencies rendered as geometric shapes, color-coded by interval and amplitude. The base structure is mathematical, she said. Prime numbers, geometric progressions, standard stuff, the kind of thing we've been broadcasting into space ourselves for 150 years on the assumption that mathematics is a universal language. But embedded within that base structure is a secondary layer. She zoomed in on a specific section of the pattern. And the secondary layer isn't mathematical. It's, we think, contextual. Emotional, maybe, in the way that music carries emotional information that pure notation doesn't capture. Vale studied the pattern. Can you read it? We can identify it. Reading it is a different thing entirely. She leaned back. What we're fairly confident about is this. The base layer is an introduction. We are here. We are intelligent. We are communicating. Standard first contact protocol, essentially, which is interesting in itself because it implies they've done this before. And the secondary layer? Priya was quiet for a moment. The secondary layer changes, she said. Subtly but measurably with each repetition. Something in it is evolving. Responding possibly to our own transmissions back at them. She paused. If I had to characterize it in human emotional terms, which is a deeply imperfect framework for this, I would say the secondary layer sounds like patience wearing thin. On day 10 the alien vessel changed course. It had been moving inward along a trajectory that would have brought it to the orbital path of Mars in approximately 3 weeks. That trajectory had allowed the UN strategists a certain cold comfort. 3 weeks was time to prepare, to assess, to establish at least a partial communication baseline. The course change reduced that window to 4 days. Admiral Commander Talon convened an emergency command briefing that lasted 6 hours. Vale attended as part of the diplomatic coordination staff. He sat at the back of the room and listened to people considerably more senior than himself discuss options with the careful, measured language of professionals who were trying very hard not to say we don't know what to do. The options were bluntly limited. Option 1. Intercept. Move the first deep response fleet to a blocking position and transmit a clear signal that the vessel would not be permitted to advance further without establishing communication. This was the strong border approach. It risked being read as aggression. Option 2. Withdraw. Pull the fleet back, allow the vessel to advance, and transmit a cooperative signal indicating non-hostility. This was the open-hand approach. It risked being read as weakness. Option 3. Matched approach. Move the Sovereign alone, without the supporting fleet, forward to an intermediate position and transmit a combined signal. Not blocking, not retreating, but meeting. This was the approach Counselor Sovereign Solis favored. It was also, strategically, the approach that placed the most risk on a single ship. If that vessel decides our matched approach is an attack posture, said Fleet Admiral Barros, the senior military commander, we lose the Sovereign. If we send the full fleet, Solis replied, we almost certainly look like an attack posture. And if we withdraw? Then we've communicated, on first contact, that humanity backs down when something larger approaches. She said it without drama. That is a message I am not willing to send. The room was quiet. Talon, at the head of the table, said, Option 3. Vale spent the night before the Sovereign's forward movement on the observation deck. It was a practical space, not the romanticized viewports of old science fiction, but a reinforced transparency panel roughly 3 meters wide, set into the hull along an observation corridor used primarily by maintenance crews. The stars outside were sharp and still. The alien vessel was not yet visible to the naked eye, but he knew it was there, a calculated point in the darkness moving toward them. He heard footsteps and didn't turn. Counselor Sovereign Emira Solis came to stand beside him. She was not wearing her formal insignia. She had the look of someone who had also not slept, and had stopped pretending she might. You're not nervous, she said. It wasn't quite a question. I am, he said. I'm just quiet about it. She almost smiled. Is that training or personality? Both probably. Hard to separate them after a while. They stood in silence for a moment. Outside nothing moved. Can I ask you something, Counselor? Emira, she said. Given that we might all die in 4 days, I think we can dispense with the title. Why bring the Sovereign Council chair onto a potential first contact warship? She was quiet for a long moment. Because, she said finally, the last time humanity made a decision this large, the Luna Accords, the Martian Autonomy Framework, the Deep Space Treaty, it was made by military commanders and career diplomats who were very good at their jobs and very far from the actual consequences. She turned slightly to look at him. I decided, when I took this position, that I would not be the kind of leader who makes decisions from safety. If I'm asking 14 warship crews to go somewhere that might get them killed, the least I can do is be there. Vale considered that. That's either very brave, he said, or very bad strategy. It's both, she said. Most honest leadership is. He turned to look at her then. In the cold light from the observation panel, she looked less like a head of state and more like what she actually was. A person carrying a weight that had been placed on her by circumstances larger than any individual, doing the best she could with it. He understood that feeling exactly. I'll keep you safe, he said. Not as a soldier making a promise to a superior. As one person saying a true thing to another. She looked at him. I know, she said. And somehow, impossibly, she did. The Sovereign broke from fleet formation at 0600 hours on day 11. Watching from the bridge, Vale understood why ships in old Earth naval tradition were given feminine pronouns. There was something about the way the Sovereign moved, deliberate, unhurried, carrying herself with the particular dignity of something enormous choosing to be precise, that felt like a personality rather than a machine. The 14 ships of the first Deep Response Fleet held position. From the Sovereign's aft cameras, they appeared as a cluster of lights in the dark, growing smaller. The communications channel from Fleet Admiral Barros remained open but silent. There was nothing useful left to say. Ahead, the alien vessel had stopped. It had halted its inward trajectory approximately 2.2 million kilometers from the Sovereign's forward position, at roughly the same time the Sovereign had broken from the fleet. The coincidence, if it was a coincidence, was not lost on anyone on the bridge. "It saw us move," said Talon, standing at the tactical display. "And it matched the movement." "Mirroring behavior," Priya said from the communication station. In xenobiological contact theory, behavioral mirroring during early contact is often interpreted as an affiliative response, an attempt to establish we are paying attention to you without escalation. "Or," said Barros over the comm channel from the fleet, "it stopped because it's preparing something." "That is also possible," Priya admitted. The signal changed at 0743 hours. The repeating pattern, the one Priya had been analyzing for 11 days, broke sequence. For 4 minutes and 31 seconds, the alien vessel transmitted nothing. Then it began again but different. The mathematical base layer was gone. Only the secondary layer remained, and it was no longer cycling through its previous range. It had simplified. "It's reduced itself," Priya said, her voice tight with something between excitement and controlled alarm. "The entire transmission has compressed into, look at this structure. It's almost bilateral. Call and response architecture. It wants us to answer," Talon said. "It wants us to talk." The next 6 hours were among the most intense of Vale's professional life, and he had once spent 9 hours coordinating a structural evacuation in a collapsing pressurized habitat. The difference was that there, he'd known the rules of physics. Here, the team in the signal bay was effectively attempting to have a conversation in a language where they understood perhaps 12 words, were guessing at the grammar, and had no margin for a misunderstanding. He watched Priya work. She was extraordinary at it, not because she was certain, but because she was methodical in her uncertainty. Every proposed response transmission was analyzed for what it confirmed, what it implied, and what it might inadvertently suggest to a mind shaped by entirely different evolutionary pressures. "The problem," she told him during a brief pause, "is that we can't know what their emotional or social reference points are. A signal that reads as welcoming to us might read as territorial to them. A signal that reads as open might read as submissive. We're not just translating language, we're translating assumptions about reality." "So what do you send?" She looked at him. "Mathematics," she said. "Specifically, mathematics that demonstrates awareness of their signal structure. We're not introducing ourselves anymore. We're showing them we heard them." She paused. "That we were listening." The first response transmission went out at 1340 hours. It was 17 seconds long. It referenced 3 structural elements from the alien transmission, rearranged in a sequence that acknowledged receipt and invited continuation. Priya had described it, somewhat helplessly, as the xenolinguistic equivalent of saying "Yes, we're here, keep talking." The alien vessel responded in 6 minutes. What followed was not a conversation in any conventional sense. Over the next 18 hours, the Sovereign and the alien vessel exchanged 43 transmissions. The exchanges were slow, each one took hours to analyze, craft, and transmit, but they were building something. A foundation. A shared reference structure that both sides were contributing to, brick by painstaking brick. By transmission 20, the team had established, with reasonable confidence, a handful of structural equivalencies. Not words, nothing so clean as words, but something like conceptual territories. Here. Moving. Stopped. Question. Answer. By transmission 35, something remarkable happened. The alien vessel's transmission included a structure the team had not seen before. It was brief, 11 seconds, and it didn't fit the emerging shared framework. Priya spent 2 hours on it before she came to find Vale, who was eating a meal he couldn't taste in the corridor outside the signal bay. "It's asking about the fleet," she said. He looked up. "What?" "The transmission, the new structure, we think it's referencing the other ships. The 14 ships holding position behind us." She sat down across from him. "It knows we didn't come alone. It's asking about them." "Asking what?" "Asking, and I want to be clear, this is an interpretation with significant uncertainty, whether they are under our authority. Whether the Sovereign speaks for them." Vale set down his meal. "And the counselor's response?" Priya almost smiled. "She's composing it herself." Emra Solis spent 40 minutes writing a 17-second transmission. Vale was present when she delivered it to the signal team, a sequence that drew on the established shared framework to communicate as clearly as the primitive architecture allowed. "Yes. All of those. Ours. I speak." The alien vessel received the transmission. Then, for the first time since it had stopped, it moved. Not toward them. Not away. It rotated, a slow, deliberate rotation, 180 degrees, bringing what the reconnaissance imagery had suggested was its forward orientation toward the sovereign directly. Everyone on the bridge understood what that meant on an instinctive level that transcended training. Was looking at them. "Counselor," Talon said quietly, "I would recommend we hold position," Solis said. "Ma'am?" "Hold position." She was standing at the forward display, watching the alien vessel's rotation complete. Her voice was calm. "It's not threatening us. It's acknowledging us." She paused. "It just looked us in the eye." Vale stood beside her. He was not technically doing anything, not yet. But his hand had moved, without deliberate decision, to a position where he could physically place himself between her and anything that came next. She noticed. She didn't look at him. But the slight shift in her posture told him she had. The alien vessel completed its rotation and went still. Then it sent a new transmission. It was 47 seconds long, by far the longest single transmission they had received. Priya's team would spend 11 hours analyzing it. What they would eventually determine was that it contained, layered within its structure, something that functioned like a formal acknowledgement, and something that functioned like a request. The request was for a closer meeting. Not a transmission exchange. A proximity exchange. Physical. Close enough that whatever sensors the alien vessel used for detailed analysis could reach the sovereign directly. It was asking them to come nearer. Vale looked at the counselor. She looked at him. "Well," she said very quietly, "I suppose we didn't come all this way to stay at a safe distance." The request for a proximity exchange divided the sovereign's command staff exactly in half. Talon was not opposed. She was cautious. There was a meaningful difference, and her caution took the form of a methodical list of conditions she wanted in place before any closer approach was authorized. Signal buoys at 15-minute intervals. Continuous transmission to the fleet. Automated distress protocols that would trigger without human input if the sovereign's hull integrity dropped below threshold. She was the kind of commander who, when she had to do something dangerous, made sure the danger was as documented and as recoverable as the situation allowed. Fleet Admiral Barros, communicating from the holding fleet position, was opposed. He used language like tactical exposure and unacceptable risk profile and absence of verified non-hostile intent, all of which were professionally accurate assessments of the situation and all of which, Vale thought, missed the fundamental point. The fundamental point was that the alien vessel had already demonstrated it could kill them whenever it chose to. It had killed 41 people on the Meridian Cross and then stopped. It had approached within weapons range of the entire 1st Deep Response Fleet and not fired. Whatever its intentions were, adding or subtracting 2 million kilometers from the gap between them was not the variable that determined whether humanity survived this encounter. Solis made that argument in the command briefing, precisely and without heat, and then she made the call. The Sovereign would close to 800 kilometers. Not 200. Not the 50 that might have been tactically equivalent to a handshake. 800, close enough to be meaningful, far enough to constitute a choice rather than a surrender. 800 kilometers, Barros repeated from the comm. His voice carried the particular flatness of a senior officer who had been overruled and was choosing professionalism over protest. 800 kilometers, Solis confirmed. The Sovereign began to move. The approach took 4 hours at reduced thrust. During those 4 hours the alien vessel did nothing. That was the word the incident logs would use. Nothing. But nothing, Vale was learning, could contain a great deal. The vessel's surface, if surface was the right word for the irregular layered architecture of a structure that seemed grown as much as built, showed no visible activity. No weapons charging. No launch ports opening. No detectable energy buildup beyond the steady hum of whatever drove it through space. It simply waited. There is a specific quality to being waited for by something much larger than yourself. Vale had experienced it once before, during the Ganymede evacuation, when a structural collapse had left him and 16 civilians in a corridor while 200 tons of rock and pressurized composite decided whether or not to continue falling. The feeling was not exactly fear. Fear was reactive. It spiked and subsided with immediate threats. This was something else. A sustained, deliberate awareness of scale. Of the space between yourself and the thing that could, without particular effort, end you. He watched Emra Solis through those 4 hours. She did not pace. She did not perform confidence. She stood at the forward display, she reviewed transmissions, she spoke with Priya about linguistic probabilities, she drank 2 cups of tea that she mostly forgot about. She was, he realized, simply present, not managing herself for the benefit of the room, but genuinely working the problem with all of her attention. He had met very few people in his life who could do that under this kind of pressure. He found himself thinking that humanity had possibly sent exactly the right person. At 800 kilometers, the Sovereign matched the alien vessel's velocity and stopped. For 11 minutes, nothing was exchanged. Then the alien vessel's transmission pattern changed again, and this time Priya identified the change in under an hour. "It's initiating an active scan," she said. "Broad spectrum, non-destructive. It's looking at us. In detail." "Let it," Solis said. The scan lasted 22 minutes. When it concluded, the alien vessel transmitted the most complex signal it had yet produced. 112 seconds, layered in a structure that took the full team 8 hours to partially parse. What they found inside it was extraordinary. The transmission contained a response to the scan. Not a scan of its own, not a request for reciprocal examination, but a report. A summary structured in the shared framework they had been building, of what the scan had found. As if the alien vessel had looked at the Sovereign in detail and then turned to them and said, "This is what we see. Does this match what you are?" "It's verifying," Priya said. She was pacing. The coffee was gone, had been gone for hours, but she moved like someone who had found a second energy source beyond caffeine. "It's not just gathering data. It's checking the data against us. It wants to know if we understand what it's saying about ourselves." "Can we answer it?" Vale asked. "Some of it. The structural elements, the physical description of the ship, crew presence, energy signatures. Those we can confirm using the shared framework. The biological data is harder." It identified multiple distinct biological profiles aboard, which, yes, obviously we have a diverse crew, but the way it's asking about it suggests it finds that significant. "Multiple species?" Talon offered. "Maybe. Or maybe it's just that we have biological complexity. Individuality at scale." Priya stopped pacing. It might be the first time it's encountered a vessel with hundreds of distinct biological signatures rather than a more homogeneous crew. Or a single operator. Or whatever their equivalent is. The response transmission took 16 hours to prepare. It was, by far, the most sophisticated thing the team had produced. A carefully layered sequence that confirmed the physical and biological data, introduced a simplified structure for individual identity, and ended with a structure they had tentatively identified as a question marker turned back toward the alien vessel. "You examined us. We confirm. Now will you share the same?" The alien vessel's response came in 43 minutes. It was brief, 9 seconds. Plain. Direct. Priya sat with it for 20 minutes before she looked up with an expression Vale had never seen on her before. Something past excitement, past scientific satisfaction, into a territory that was almost reverence. "It said yes," she said. And then softer, "and I think it said, finally." The implications of that word, finally, took up a great deal of the Sovereign's senior staff for the remainder of that day. Finally implied waiting. Finally implied expectation. Finally implied that this encounter was not, from the alien vessel's perspective, an accident or a first attempt, but a completion. It had been looking for someone to say yes. How long? Priya's team spent 12 hours running structural comparisons between the alien transmission patterns and historical deep space signals cataloged by SETI monitoring programs going back 180 years. The results were inconclusive. There were similarities, patterns that might have been early, unsuccessful contact attempts, or might have been coincidental noise, but the possibility alone was staggering. Vale sat with that possibility in the quiet of the observation corridor, the alien vessel visible now as a faint, irregular shape against the stars, 800 kilometers away. Close enough almost to imagine. He thought about 41 people aboard a cargo hauler who had died without knowing what they'd encountered. He thought about 14 ships holding position behind them, crewed by people waiting to find out if they'd need to fight. He thought about what it meant, practically, humanly, to be the species that finally answered. He didn't feel proud. Pride felt too small for the moment. He felt responsible. The crisis came without warning at 0312 hours on day 14. It came from an unexpected direction, not from the alien vessel, which had maintained its 800-kilometer position with patient consistency, but from somewhere in the dark between the Sovereign and the holding fleet. The long-range array registered the energy signature first. A second alien vessel, smaller than the first, emerging from what the navigation team initially misidentified as an anomalous stellar reflection. It had been there for an unknown length of time, perhaps days, running dark, observing. It was now powering up. The alarms on the Sovereign were not the dramatic horns of old film science fiction. They were a low, pulsing tone that spread through the ship at a frequency specifically chosen by UN sound engineers to elevate alertness without triggering panic response. Vale was asleep when it sounded. He was dressed and moving in under 90 seconds. He found the diplomatic coordination deck in controlled chaos. Controlled meaning everyone was doing their jobs, chaos meaning no one had the information they needed to know if the jobs mattered. Solis was already there. She was at the main display watching the tactical feed update in real time. The second vessel's position placed it between the Sovereign and the fleet, not blocking the Sovereign from retreat, but positioned at an angle that would make any rapid withdrawal tactically complicated. Is it from the same origin? She asked Priya. Structural profile suggests yes, same construction philosophy, similar material signature. But smaller. And the energy pattern is different. Priya's hands moved across the interface with the speed of someone who had been working on alien signal analysis for 2 weeks straight. It's not transmitting on any frequency we've established with the primary vessel. Is the primary vessel reacting to it? Pause. Yes. The primary vessel's transmission pattern changed the moment the second vessel powered up. Same channel, same shared framework, but the tone has shifted. How? Priya looked up. If I had to describe it in human terms, she said carefully, the primary vessel sounds alarmed. What followed was 31 minutes of the most intense diplomatic and strategic coordination the Sovereign had ever attempted. The second alien vessel was not, it became apparent, affiliated with the first. The primary vessel's transmissions, increasingly urgent within the shared framework, conveyed something that Priya's team gradually, painstakingly assembled into a coherent message. The second vessel was not part of its delegation. The shared term that emerged from the transmission, imperfect, translated through a framework built in 2 weeks, was something between unauthorized and hostile. There's a faction, Priya said, her voice strained. Within whatever society or political structure the primary vessel represents, there's a faction that doesn't want this contact to happen. They followed it, Talon said. They let it make contact and then they followed it to, what? Stop the process. Or to prevent whatever agreement might come out of it from being witnessed. Or, said Barros from the fleet comm with military precision, to ensure that humanity doesn't walk away from this encounter as a credible partner. The second vessel was powering its weapons systems. That much was clear from the energy signatures. The same class of discharge that had destroyed the Meridian Cross, now warming up at 340,000 kilometers. Barros's voice came through flat and urgent. I am moving the fleet to an intercept position. Hold, Solis said. Counselor. Hold. Her voice was not loud. It was the voice of someone who had thought further ahead than the immediate moment. If we move the fleet aggressively, we confirm to everyone watching, the primary vessel, the secondary vessel, whatever other observers might be out there, that humanity's first response to an unknown threat is military mass. She turned to Vale. Her eyes were very clear. Darius. It was the first time she had used his first name. We need to respond to the primary vessel directly. Right now. We need to tell it we understand the situation and we need to ask what it needs from us. And if the answer is move your ship, then we move our ship. She said it without hesitation. We don't hold ground just to prove we can hold ground. We hold it when holding it matters. Priya's team transmitted the response in 11 minutes. Fast by their standards, dangerously fast in terms of linguistic precision, but the situation had stripped the luxury of time away. The primary vessel answered in 4 minutes. What it communicated was not a request. It was something Priya translated after the fact as closer to an instruction, specifically an instruction to not move, to stay exactly where they were. The primary vessel's transmission included structural elements they had never seen before. Something dense, layered, carrying an emotional weight the team felt before they fully analyzed it. It was, as best they could determine, a promise. The second vessel fired. Not at the Sovereign. The primary vessel placed itself between the two ships in a movement that covered 400 kilometers in under 12 seconds, a maneuver so fast it defied the Sovereign crew's intuitive understanding of inertia, and absorbed the discharge along its forward section. The hit was visible on the Sovereign's optical sensors, a bloom of energy against the primary vessel's hull, controlled but unmistakably real. Not a grazing impact. A direct hit, absorbed at close range. To protect the Sovereign. To protect them. The bridge was silent for 4 full seconds. Then Talon said very quietly, "It took a hit for us." "It knew," Priya said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "It anticipated the shot. It moved specifically to intercept it." She looked up. "It made a decision to protect us." Vale was looking at Solis. She was still watching the display, the primary vessel's hull, damaged but stable, the second vessel now pulling back in the face of a response from the primary vessel's own weapons systems, and there was something in her expression that he had not seen before. Not surprise. Not relief. Something softer. Something that in a person with less discipline would have broken into open emotion. Get a damage assessment on the primary vessel, she said. Her voice was steady. And get me a transmission ready. I want to acknowledge what just happened and I want it to be, she paused briefly, unambiguous. What do you want to say? Priya asked. Solis considered for a moment. Gratitude, she said. And we are still here. The second vessel withdrew. 30 minutes later, it had reversed course entirely, whether driven off by the primary vessel's response or by the visible presence of 14 UN warships now holding an unambiguous position, there was no way to know. Probably both. The primary vessel held its position. Damage. Present. The transmission it sent 2 hours later, when Priya's team had finally assembled a response worthy of the moment, contained a structure none of them had encountered before. A new element in the shared framework, offered from the alien vessel's side. It was, after hours of analysis, determined to be something functionally equivalent to a name. It was giving them something to call it. They called it the Archon. The name came from Priya, who extracted a phonetic approximation from the alien vessel's self-designation and then spent 40 minutes trying to explain to the broader team why linguistic approximation of an alien name was an inherently imperfect exercise and should be treated as a working label rather than a translation. The team listened respectfully and kept calling it the Archon anyway because human beings are pattern-seeking creatures and a name, even an imperfect one, transforms it into a them. That distinction mattered more than it might have seemed. The Archon was damaged. The assessment the Sovereign sensors could perform from 800 kilometers was limited, alien materials didn't respond to standard hull integrity scans in predictable ways, but the energy emissions from its forward section had changed character in the hours following the second vessel's attack. Lower amplitude. Less steady. Something that, if it were a human ship, you would call a limp. Solis convened a small meeting in the signal bay at 0800 hours. Herself, Talon, Priya, and Vale. No aides. No additional staff. What can we offer? She asked. Talon answered first. Materially, very little we're confident would be compatible. We don't know what their hull is composed of, how their energy systems work, or what tools they'd use for repair. Sending a maintenance team would be, she paused, premature. Symbolically, Priya said, we can offer a great deal. The transmission framework we've built together has enough structure now to communicate concern, assistance willingness, and patience. We can tell it we're not leaving. That we're staying until it's stable. Can we say thank you? Solis asked. We already did. Can we say it better? Priya almost smiled. I'll work on it. The hours that followed were quieter than any point in the previous 2 weeks. The Archon was minimizing its transmissions, not cutting contact but reducing frequency, in a pattern Priya suggested might be analogous to conserving energy during repair. The Sovereign matched that rhythm, present, transmitting at low intervals, not demanding response. Vale found himself with something he hadn't had since boarding the Sovereign: time to think. He used it mostly to watch. He watched Priya's team work with the focused efficiency of people who had passed through exhaustion into a second state that resembled it but was actually something more like sustained concentration, a kind of professional flow state that he recognized from long military operations. He watched Talon manage the ship with the quiet competence of someone who had internalized her command so completely that it no longer required effort, only attention. He watched Emra Solis. She had been awake for most of 36 hours. She had managed a crisis, directed a transmission response to an unprecedented diplomatic situation, and absorbed the information that an alien vessel had taken damage protecting humanity's flagship without allowing any of it to visibly compromise her function. Now she was sitting in a corner of the signal bay, not reading, not working, just pausing. The kind of pause that, in anyone else, he might have read as vacancy. In her, he recognized it as the deliberate rest of someone who knows they can't stop thinking but is choosing, temporarily, not to act on any of it. He brought her tea. He wasn't sure why. It seemed like the appropriate thing to do for a person who had been running on the wrong fuel for too long. She looked at the tea, then at him, with an expression that was briefly, unguardedly surprised, as if the gesture had reached her before she could put her professional reflexes in place. Thank you, she said. He sat in the adjacent chair, not because protocol suggested it, but because she didn't look like she wanted to be alone with her thoughts and she hadn't told him to stand. Are you all right? He asked. She considered the question with the same seriousness she brought to everything. "I'm processing," she said. "The Archon was hurt because of us. Because it was here, in this position, because it chose to engage with us. Whatever that means within its own political structure, whatever consequences it faces for taking that hit, that happened because we were here. And if we hadn't been here," Vale said, "and the second vessel represented what it seems to represent, that faction that doesn't want this contact to happen, the Archon would still be facing it. Without any demonstration that there's something worth protecting." She looked at him. "That's a generous interpretation." "It's an accurate one," he said. "You don't fly a vessel of that size across the solar system to say hello and then take a weapons hit for a species you've known for 2 weeks if you weren't already committed to what you're doing." She was quiet for a long moment. "It's strange," she said. "I've spent my entire career making decisions about people I was responsible for, crew, citizens, diplomatic partners. I've always understood responsibility on a human scale. Even the large decisions, the ones that affected millions of people, those were still human millions. People I could, in some sense, imagine." She looked at the display where the Archon's transmission signal pulsed in its reduced, careful rhythm. "Whatever's aboard that vessel has a history I can't imagine. Has a sense of the universe that predates ours by who knows how long. Has, apparently, been looking for us or something like us. Long enough that finally was the word it chose when we answered." She paused. "And it just got hurt for us," she said. "And I'm responsible for that. And I can't even properly comprehend it." Vale thought about that. "I think," he said slowly, "that's what it means to be at the edge of something genuinely new. You don't get to have the right framework for it yet. You just have to be present in it and make the best decisions you can with what you actually understand." She turned to look at him. "Is that how you managed the Ganymede evacuation?" 17 people. 4 minutes. Collapsing structure." He nodded. "I didn't understand the physics of what was happening. I didn't need to. I needed to move people in the right direction and trust that the direction was right. And was it? They all survived." She looked at him for a moment longer than the conversation required. Then she said, "Get some sleep, Darius. You're going to need it." "So are you." "I will," she said. "Soon." He stood to leave. At the door he paused, not sure why, only sure that leaving felt incomplete. "For what it's worth," he said without turning fully, "I think you've made every decision correctly. I've been in enough situations to know the difference between good decisions that go wrong and bad ones. Everything you've chosen, I would have chosen the same." He left before she could respond. He wasn't sure if that was bravery or cowardice. Probably both. The attack came at 0247 hours. Not from the Archon. Not from the second vessel, which had withdrawn and disappeared from sensor range. From a third, smaller still, faster, the energy profile consistent with the same hostile faction, possibly prepositioned days earlier. It fired at the Sovereign from 12 kilometers. At that range there was no time for defensive maneuver. There was barely time for the alarm to reach its second pulse. The shot struck the diplomatic coordination deck. Vale, by pure chance, had not yet reached his quarters. He was 2 corridors away near the observation panel when the impact hit, a physical shock transmitted through the hull that felt less like an explosion and more like the ship flinching. He had the bulkhead open and was moving before the emergency lighting fully activated. The diplomatic coordination deck was dark and pressurized and full of smoke from a secondary systems fire. He found 2 staff members first, both injured but conscious, both able to move. He got them through the bulkhead and went back. He found Emira Solis on the floor near the display terminal. She was conscious. Her eyes were open. But there was blood, from a head laceration from her right shoulder where a system panel had separated from the wall, and she wasn't moving with the clarity of someone fully in control of her body. He knelt beside her. Assessed. Spoke to her. "I'm here," she said. Her voice was thinner than usual. "I'm here." "Don't move," he said. "I've got you." She didn't argue. That, more than the blood, told him how badly she was hurt. He carried her out. The Sovereign's medical bay was designed for a crew of 800 in a combat scenario. It had never been used at full capacity. Before this mission, its most significant deployment had been 12 crew members injured during a navigational incident in Jupiter's upper atmospheric approach corridor, routine by the standards the bay had been built for. Counselor Sovereign Emira Solis was admitted at 0311 hours with a grade 2 concussion, a compound laceration to the left temporal region, 2 fractured ribs, and a separated shoulder joint. The attending medical officer, Commander Dela Cruz, listed her condition as serious but stable and delivered that assessment to Admiral Commander Talon with the specific tone of medical professionalism that means, "She will survive but she is not fine." Vale received the update in the corridor outside the bay. He had been there since 03:15, after a secondary sweep of the damaged deck confirmed no additional personnel casualties. 7 crew members injured, none critical, and Solis the most seriously hurt. He had not consciously decided to wait in the corridor. He had simply not left. Talon found him there at 0400. "She's stable," Talon said. "I know. I got the update. You should sleep." "I know." Talon studied him for a moment with the precise attention of a commander reading a subordinate she respects. "Darius, you carried her out of a pressurized fire in a deck that had taken a direct weapons hit, you ensured 2 additional casualties were evacuated, and you've been standing in a corridor for 45 minutes. I'm not ordering you to leave because I lack sympathy. I'm ordering you because if something else goes wrong tonight, I need you functional." He looked at her. "Nothing else is going to go wrong tonight," he said. "Not with arrogance. With the specific calibration of someone who has read a situation deeply enough to make a confident assessment. The third vessel is gone, same withdrawal pattern as the second. The Archon is transmitting again, which means it's aware of what happened and it's still here." He paused. "It stayed." Talon was quiet. "It stayed," she repeated. "After we were hit. After everything." He looked at the closed door of the medical bay. "It stayed." At 0600 hours, Vale was given clearance to enter. The medical bay was quiet in the way that facilities in space are always quiet, not silent but background humming, alive with the mechanical breathing of equipment and the soft rhythmic readings of monitoring systems. Solis was in the second bay, elevated slightly, the shoulder immobilized, the head laceration treated and sealed. She looked smaller than she did on the bridge. Not weaker. Smaller, in the way that all people look when the architecture of their role is temporarily removed and you see them as just a person. She was awake. She looked at him when he entered, and something in her expression shifted in a way he recognized. A person recalibrating their guard when they realize the person entering doesn't require it. "The ship?" she asked. Her voice was rougher than usual. "Damage to the diplomatic coordination deck, secondary systems in that section, and a section of outer hull paneling. Nothing structural. We're operational. Casualties. 7. None critical. You're the most seriously injured." She absorbed that. "The Archon?" "Transmitting. Still holding position." He paused. "It sent a new transmission about 2 hours after the attack. Priya's team is still working through it, but the preliminary read is that it acknowledged what happened and it," he paused, "expressed something. The team is calling it concern. For us." She closed her eyes briefly. Not in relief, in something more complex. "It's going to complicate things," she said. "Diplomatically. When this record goes back to the Council, an alien vessel protecting us, taking damage for us, remaining after we were attacked, that's a narrative. A powerful one. Some members will want to leverage it. Move faster than we should. Assume more than has been established. That's a problem for when you're back on the bridge," Vale said. "I'll be back on the bridge tomorrow." Commander Cruz said 3 days minimum. She looked at him with the expression of someone who has been told 3 days minimum by a medical professional and has privately decided on a different number. "I'll be back on the bridge in 2 days," she said. He almost smiled. "That's still not tomorrow." He stayed. He hadn't planned to. He had told himself he would check on her condition, receive confirmation that she was stable, and return to his duties, which remained real and necessary, because the Sovereign was still 800 kilometers from an alien vessel of unknown ultimate intent, and the political landscape of whatever civilization that vessel came from had just revealed itself to be considerably more complicated than a single ship suggesting hello. But she didn't tell him to leave and he didn't go. They talked. Not continuously. She slept for an hour, and he sat in the chair beside the bay and reviewed the transmitted signal logs on his personal device, catching up on everything that had been compiled during the crisis hours. But when she woke, they talked, and the conversation had the particular quality of conversations between people who have been through something together, unguarded, without preamble, reaching for the things that actually mattered rather than the things that were professionally appropriate. She told him about Izmir. He told her about the asteroid belt patrol routes where he'd spent 3 years before his first combat deployment. She asked him whether he'd ever been afraid, genuinely afraid, in the way that goes beyond training responses, and he said yes twice. Once during the Ganymede evacuation, once in the last hour before the first Archon transmission arrived, when the pattern of possible futures had seemed to narrow to a single bad outcome. And tonight? She asked. He considered the question honestly. Tonight I was functioning, he said. Fear was there, but it wasn't the loudest thing. What was the loudest thing? He met her eyes. Making sure you got out, he said. She held his gaze. There was a quality to the silence after that was different from the silence before it. Something acknowledged, something present in the space between them that had not been there in their previous conversations. Not declared. Not yet. But unmistakably real. She did not look away. Darius, she said, and the way she said his name was different from any of the previous times. Not the counselor saying it, not the head of state using it as a professional address, but a person saying the name of another specific person. Yes. When I was on the floor in the deck, she said, and you came back, I wasn't sure for a moment if I was going to be able to move. My shoulder had locked. I could hear the fire but I couldn't. She paused. I couldn't locate where you were and I thought. She stopped. You don't have to say it, he said. I know I don't have to. She looked at him steadily. I thought you might not come back. And I was more affected by that than I expected to be. The monitoring equipment breathed around them. 800 kilometers away, the Archon held its position in the dark, damaged and present, having chosen to stay. He leaned forward and without deliberation, without the kind of internal negotiation that more cautious people perform before the moments that define things, he took her hand. She let him. I was always going to come back, he said. I know that now, she said. At 0900 hours, when Commander Cruz came to conduct her morning assessment, she found Counselor Sovereign Emira Solis asleep. The first real sleep, her staff would later note, that she had managed in over 3 days. Her right hand was loosely closed around the hand of Sergeant Major Darius Vale, who was also asleep in the chair beside her bay, his head tilted against the wall, his breathing steady. Cruz logged the vital signs, noted patient stable, resting well, and left without waking either of them. 3 weeks later, the Archon and the Sovereign would complete the first formal exchange of navigational data between human and alien civilization. A modest, precise, carefully bounded agreement that the United Earth Council would ratify as the first clause of what would eventually become the Archon Accord. It was not a treaty. Not yet. It was a beginning. All the things that would follow, the years of careful translation, the slow mapping of two civilizations' histories toward each other, the political fights within both societies about what the contact meant and what it obligated, those were futures not yet written. But aboard the Sovereign, on a morning when the solar light came through the observation panel at an angle that made the alien vessel's damaged hull look almost golden, Darius Vale read the preliminary ratification report and thought about the difference between scale and meaning. Humanity had not saved the galaxy. It had answered. It had stayed when staying was costly and uncertain. It had sent, to the first intelligence it encountered in the darkness, a person who understood that leadership was not performance, and a soldier who understood that protection was not posture. And something enormous, wounded, and patient had decided, on the basis of that evidence, that humanity was worth staying for. That was, in the end, enough. It was, in fact, everything.